The night was silent, except for the soft rustle of wind in the trees. Ethan Cole had been asleep in his small wooden cabin at the edge of the settlement, his loyal dog, Ranger, sleeping by the door. It was just another quiet night on this far-off colony world, far from the main cities and even farther from Troublor, so Ethan thought. Suddenly, Ranger's head shot up, ears twitching, his deep growl breaking the stillness. Ethan stirred, frowning. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, but before he could reach for the lamp, Ranger let out a sharp bark, then another. The sound was urgent, not the casual bark for a passing animal, but the kind that made a man's heart tighten. Something was out there. Ethan threw on his boots, grabbed the flashlight from the table, and reached for the old rifle mounted on the wall. By the time he opened the door, Ranger had already bounded outside, barking into the darkness. The moon cast a pale light over the forest, the shadows shifting between the trees. Ranger stopped, head low, sniffing the ground before darting toward the dense undergrowth. "Ranger?" "Wait," Ethan hissed, but the dog was gone. He had no choice but to follow. The ground was damp from the day's rain, leaves crunching under his boots as he pushed through. The cold air bit at his face. And the further he went, the louder Ranger's barking grew. It wasn't an aggressive bark. Now it was different. Almost like he was calling Ethan to see something, and then Ethan saw it at the base of a fallen tree. Half covered in mud and leaves was a shape. It was too big to be a small animal, too strange to be a colonist. Ethan's heart began to pound. He stepped closer, his flashlight beam sweeping over the figure. The light revealed blood, dark and almost black in the moonlight, pooling around. The body, the figure, war-torn. Burnt armor with markings Ethan recognized instantly, an enemy soldier. His grip on the rifle tightened. The war with this alien species had left scars across human colonies, and Ethan had lost friends because of them. Everything in him told him to turn around, leave the creature to die. But something made him pause. The alien shifted weakly, letting out a low, pained sound. Ranger stood protectively near the alien, his tail low but wagging slightly. That confused Ethan. Ranger was a good judge of character. He had bitten more than one drunk troublemaker before they could cause harm. But now, the dog's body language was almost gentle. Ethan crouched down, shining the light on the alien's face. It was a young female lad. Least Ethan thought so. Her skin was a pale lavender, almost glowing under the moonlight. Her eyes closed tightly in pain. She had sharp cheekbones and a thin line of blood running from her lip. A strange symbol was burned into the side of her armor, different from the usual enemy insignia. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Then her lips moved. At first, Ethan thought it was just the alien tongue. But no. A broken, trembling voice whispered, "Please, help." The words were awkward, but they were in English. Ethan froze. He wasn't sure if it was a trick or genuine desperation. The flashlight revealed more plasma burns along her side, deep gashes that no human medicine could easily heal. Someone hadn't just wounded her in battle, they had tried to finish her off. He looked around, his soldier's instincts kicking in. If she was here, wounded, then whoever had done this could still be nearby. The forest suddenly felt too quiet, too watchful. Ranger whined and looked up at Ethan, as if urging him to act. Ethan's mind raced. He could leave her here, go back, pretend he never saw anything. Stop something about the sight in front of him. The enemy soldier, bleeding out, whispering for help, made his chest tighten. The war had taught him that mercy was rare, but maybe that was why it mattered. He knelt beside her, keeping his rifle in one hand. "Can you move?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Her eyes flickered open for the first time, large, glassy, filled with pain and fear. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Ranger licked her hand gently, earning a weak, almost confused look from her. Ethan knew he didn't have much time. If any patrol's human or alien found them like this, the story would end badly. Still, the choice stood before him. Walk away and live with it, or carry her back and risk everything. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint sound of something far away. Boots. Voices he didn't know, but in that moment, Ethan realized he had already made his decision. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, crouched down, and slid his arms under her. She was lighter than he expected, though every movement made her wince in pain. "All right, girl," he muttered. "Let's get you out of here," Ranger barked once, sharply, then trotted ahead, leading the way back toward the cabin. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, a pair of unseen eyes watched. The night had begun. Quietly, but Ethan knew life would never be the same after this. Ethan kicked the cabin door shut with his heel, the wooden frame rattling as he stepped inside. Ranger darted past him, circling the living room before returning to stand guard. By the door, Ethan moved quickly, lowering the wounded alien onto an old, patched couch. She winced, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips. Up close, she looked even worse, blood seeping from burns, skin around the wounds swelling, her breathing shallow and uneven. Ethan tossed his rifle onto the table, grabbed a first aid kit from a shelf, and dropped to one knee beside her. "I don't even know if this stuff will work on you," he muttered, snapping open the kit. The alien's eyes fluttered open again, cloudy but alert enough to study him. Her gaze moved to the dog-fur stranger, sat calmly, his head tilted, watching her. Then her eyes shifted to Ethan. Cautious but not hostile, her voice came out low, broken. "You? Help me." "Why?" The words were clumsy but understandable. Ethan kept his hands busy, tearing strips of cloth, cleaning blood where he could. "You're bleeding to death on my doorstep," he replied flatly. "That's reason enough." She didn't respond, just watched him, as though trying to read if he was lying. Ethan wasn't gentle by nature. He was a farmer now, but he'd been a soldier before. His hands were rough, and his patience short, but something about this alien's fragile state. It gnawed at him. He dabbed antiseptic on a wound, and she hissed, jerking slightly. "Yeah, I know stings," he said. Hold still. He wanted to hate her. Her kind had raided human colonies for years. He'd seen the bodies they left behind, but this one didn't look like a warrior now. She looked like prey. Ethan shook the thought away. Focusing on the burns along her ribs, the edges were charred in a way that suggested close-range fire. Someone had shot her at point blank. Not in a battle, but in execution. Ranger patted closer. Sniffing her hand, she flinched at first, then slowly let her fingers curl into the dog's fur. Ethan caught the flicker of surprise on her face, like no creature had ever approached her without hostility. "What's your name?" Ethan asked suddenly. She blinked, confused, as though no one had asked her that in a long time. "Kira," she whispered, voice barely more than air. Ethan nodded slowly. "All right, Kira. You're safe here." For now, he wrapped her side in bandages, his mind working faster than his hands. If the enemy had been chasing her, they could already be sweeping the settlement. The lights he'd seen earlier in the forest might have been a search party if they knocked on his door and found her here. He'd be branded a traitor by his own people. "You were on the other side of the line a week ago," Ethan said, more as a statement than a question. Kira's lips trembled. "I no fight humans, not kill. I run." Ethan frowned. He wanted details, but before he could push, Ranger's ears perked, and he let out a low growl. Ethan froze, listening through the walls. He caught at a faint hum in the air, followed by the sound of crunching gravel. Someone was outside. Ethan snuffed the oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness except for the moonlight through the window. "Don't move," he whispered, his tone sharp enough that even Kira understood. Ranger moved to the door, growling. Low in his throat, Ethan grabbed his rifle, peering through the thin curtain. A pale blue light swept across the trees. 3 figures in dark armor moved slowly through the yard, their helmets glowing faintly. Ethan's pulse quickened. Enemy scouts searching. One of them stopped, scanning the cabin with a device that gave a soft, mechanical hum. Ethan's gut tightened. They were looking for her. A heavy knock rattled the door. Human. A metallic voice called in heavily accented English. "We searched, no trouble." Ethan swallowed, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Haven't seen anyone out here?" The knock came again, harder this time. The soldier's visor caught the moonlight, and for a moment, Ethan thought they'd just kicked the door in. Then one of them stepped closer to the window. Ethan's stomach dropped as the soldier's gaze fell on Ranger's muddy paws. The prints were still damp, clear evidence of a recent run through the forest. The alien tilted their head slightly, then stepped back. After a tense pause, the metallic voice came again. "If C. Call." They turned, the 3 of them melting back into the shadows of the trees. Ethan waited, still as stone, until the hum of their scanners faded. He let out a slow breath, lowering the rifle. Kira was staring at him, wide-eyed. "They kill me," she whispered. "I not go back." Ethan studied her for a long moment. He didn't know her full story yet. But one thing was clear: if he let them find her, she wouldn't live to see another sunrise. "Then you won't go back," he said finally, voice steady. "Not if I can help it." Ranger thumped his tail softly against the floor, as if sealing the promise. Outside, the forest was quiet again, but Ethan knew the danger hadn't passed. This was only the beginning. Ethan moved quickly, the danger of that knock still hanging. Heavy in his mind, the search party was gone for now. But it didn't mean they wouldn't be back. Kira sat stiffly on the couch, her bandaged side darkening with fresh blood. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale under the dim lantern light. If he didn't act fast, she wouldn't survive long enough to worry about patrols. Ranger patted over, resting his head on Kira's lap. The alien's fingers hesitated, then slowly curled into his fur again. It was a strange sight, this loyal farm dog comforting someone who, by all logic, should have been his enemy. But Ranger wasn't judging, and neither could Ethan not. Right now, he fetched an old metal basin, filling it with hot water from the stove. "Keep pressure here," Ethan instructed, placing her own trembling hand over the worst wound. Kira obeyed silently, her eyes following his movements with a mix of fear and curiosity. Ethan rummaged through a cabinet and pulled out 2 more medkits. One military issued from his soldier days and another local colony standard. Neither were designed for alien physiology, but it was all he had when he knelt back beside her. He caught the faint scent of something strange, sweet but metallic coming from her wounds. Alien blood, he thought grimly. He carefully peeled away the damp cloth he'd wrapped earlier. Kira clenched her teeth but didn't cry out. The burns were deep, the edges seared black, as if her armor had failed against a close-range plasma burst. Her side had smaller puncture wounds, likely shrapnel or energy fragments lodged under the skin. "This is going to hurt," Ethan warned. She gave the faintest nod. He took sterilized tweezers and began removing the fragments one by one. Kira's breathing hitched with each movement, her hands gripping the couch so tightly the worn fabric tore. Ranger whined quietly, sensing her pain. "Almost done," Ethan muttered, though they both knew it wasn't true. When the last shard was out, he cleaned the burns with antiseptic, the liquid sizzling faintly against her skin. Kira jerked and let out a low, pained sound, half growl, half gasp. I know," Ethan murmured, his voice softer now. "You'll thank me later, once the wounds were clean." He applied a thick layer of burn salve. It wasn't formulated for her biology. But he hoped the anti-infection properties would still work. He wrapped her side tightly with fresh bandages, securing them with practiced efficiency by the time he finished. Sweat was running down his temples from the tension of working so close to someone his people called an enemy. Kira leaned back, exhausted. "You? Soldier?" she asked weakly. Ethan glanced at her, then at the old rifle leaning against the wall. "Was," he said simply, "a long time ago." She studied him for a moment, then looked away, as if debating whether to speak. "No. Like them?" she finally said, her voice breaking slightly. Ethan frowned. "Them? My people. My army," she whispered. "They kill children, burn homes. I refuse." Her hands trembled as she spoke, her eyes unfocused as if she was seeing something far away. "They call me traitor. Hunt me." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the stove fire. Ethan had heard stories of defectors from enemy ranks, but most never survived long enough to reach human territory. If she was telling the truth, it meant she wasn't here as an invader, she was running for her life. Still, part of him couldn't ignore the risk. Helping her was already enough. To brand him a collaborator if the wrong people found out. Ranger's sudden growl broke his thoughts. Ethan froze, listening. A faint hum vibrated through the cabin walls, the same sound he'd heard from the enemy scanners earlier. He doused the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "Down," he whispered sharply. Motioning for Kira to lie flat, she obeyed instantly. Pulling the blanket over herself, Ethan moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see outside. Through the trees, the blue light flickered again. Moving slowly, methodically, the patrol was sweeping back in this direction, he swore. Under his breath, they were being thorough. Maybe they'd found tracks. Maybe they'd guessed she'd sought shelter nearby. He turned to Kira. "You can't stay here. If they find you inside, neither of us makes it out alive." Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. "You send me out?" she asked in a trembling voice. Ethan shook his head. Not alone. His mind was already working Neff. He could get her into the old cellar under the barn. They might pass the search. He pulled on his coat and motioned for her to stand. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. Without a word, Ethan slipped one arm under hers, supporting her. "Wait," as they moved to the back door. Ranger trotted ahead, ears pricked, scanning the night like a soldier. The cold air hit them, sharp and biting. The barn was only 20 steps away, but it felt like miles under the looming threat of discovery. Halfway there, the hum grew louder. Patrol was closer than he'd thought. Ethan tightened his grip on Kira, whispering, "Faster." They slipped into the barn just as the blue light swept across the yard. Inside, Ethan guided her to the far corner where a trapdoor lay hidden. Under a pile of feed sacks, he yanked it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the darkness. "Down you go," he said quietly. "Don't make a sound." Kira hesitated, looking into the black pit, but Ethan's firm nod pushed her forward. Ranger slipped in after her, his tail vanishing into the shadows. Ethan lowered the trapdoor, covering it just as heavy boots crunched outside the barn wall. The voices of the enemy soldiers were muffled but unmistakable. They were close to close. Ethan's hand rested on his rifle, but he knew shooting would be suicide. The only way to survive was to keep them from ever realizing she was there. In the darkness beneath the barn, Kira clung to Ranger, her heart pounding in sync with the dog's slow, steady breaths. She didn't know why this human was risking so much for her, but for the first time since she'd fled, she felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. The night air was colder now, and the silence outside the barn felt like it was pressing in from all sides. Ethan stood in the shadows, his back against the wooden wall, rifle in hand. Through a crack between the boards, he could see faint blue light sweeping across the ground. The patrol was only a few meters away, scanning slowly, methodically. Each pass of their lights seemed to reach further, probing into every shadow beneath the barn. Under the trapdoor, Kira crouched in the cellar's dark corner, her breathing shallow. Ranger lay pressed against her side, his warm body still, his ears twitching at every sound. She could feel the vibrations of footsteps through the dirt floor above. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The sound of boots grew louder, heavier. Someone had stepped into the barn. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened. He could hear their armor shift, the faint hum of their scanning device buzzing like an insect. A beam of pale blue light swept across the hay bales, the old tools, the feed sacks. It stopped for a moment on the pile in the corner right above where the trapdoor lay hidden. Ethan's mind raced. If they started poking around, they'd see the disturbed sacks. Maybe even the faint outline of the door. He stepped forward. From the shadows, making his movement deliberate but casual. "Can I help you?" he said in a steady voice, his tone edged with annoyance. The alien soldier turned, visor reflecting the faint lantern glow from outside. "You are farmer," the soldier said in rough English. "We look for fugitive." "Yeah, I figured," Ethan replied. "But you're standing on my hay. You want to pay for it if you ruin it." The soldier tilted his head slightly, as if surprised by the human's bluntness. Ethan kept walking toward him, slow, non-threatening. "You people know how to knock, or is sneaking around in the dark part of your culture." For a tense moment, the alien didn't move. Then the light shifted away from the feed sacks and swept toward the barn entrance again. But just as Ethan thought they might leave, another soldier appeared in the doorway. This one carried a longer scanner, more advanced. He stepped inside, the device humming as it pulsed waves through the room. Ethan's stomach sank. That model could detect heat signatures, maybe even through the trapdoor down in the cellar. Kira heard the rising hum of the scanner. Her hand instinctively gripped Ranger's fur tighter. She closed her eyes, trying to slow her breathing, willing her heart to quiet. But she knew those machines could read more than sounds, sometimes even the faintest body warmth. Above, Ethan forced himself to keep talking. "So this fugitive you're looking for," he said, leaning against a post. "Did they rob you? Steal your ships? Why?" "The personal visit." The first soldier stepped closer, the visor hiding any expression. "She is dangerous," the alien said simply. Ethan shrugged. "Dangerous people don't usually bleed out in the woods, from what I've seen." The second soldier's scanner beeped faintly, one sharp tone that made Ethan's pulse spike. The soldier adjusted it, aiming toward the back of the barn. Ethan moved instinctively, stepping into the path of the scanner's beam. "Careful," he said, his voice hardening just enough to suggest he was done playing host. "Barn's old. Some of those beams could collapse if you start messing around." The soldier paused, head tilting as if calculating the risk. Another long second passed before the device was lowered. Finally, the first soldier gave a curt nod. "If see fugitive, you tell," he said flatly. Ethan nodded once. "Sure thing." They turned and left, boots crunching on the gravel as the blue light faded into the distance. Only when the last hum of the scanners disappeared did Ethan let himself exhale. He walked to the trapdoor and crouched, pulling aside the sacks quietly. Lifting it, he looked down into the dark. Kira's pale eyes stared up at him, wide and alert. "They gone," he said softly. She didn't move at first, as if she didn't quite believe it. Ranger gave a low, reassuring whine, nudging her until she climbed the narrow steps. When she emerged, she looked around the barn as if expecting the soldiers to burst back in. Ethan closed the trapdoor, covering it again. "You're lucky," he said. "That scanner they had could have picked you up if they'd gotten any closer." Kira swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I know bring trouble." "To you," Ethan shook his head. "Too late for that, but his tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. They crossed back to the cabin under the moonlight. Moving quietly inside, Ethan lit the lantern again, setting it low. Kira eased back onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at her. "You're still bleeding," Ethan noted. Fetching the medkit again, she didn't protest, though her eyes stayed on him, studying him like she still couldn't figure out why he was. "Helping her, you could have told them," she said finally, her voice low. "Could have," Ethan agreed, "but I didn't." Her gaze softened, just slightly. "Why?" He didn't answer right away, focusing on tightening her bandages. "Let's just say, not all enemies are worth killing," he said at last. Outside, the forest was quiet again. But both of them knew it wouldn't stay that way. The patrols would keep searching, and next time, they might not walk away without finding something. The lantern burned low, throwing long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the forest was silent again, but Ethan didn't trust that silence. It was the kind that came before a storm or before danger returned. Kira sat on the couch, her side freshly bandaged, her lavender skin pale under the flickering light. Ranger lay between them on the floor, his head on his paws, eyes half closed, but still alert. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his rifle resting within arm's reach. He hadn't taken his boots off, hadn't even loosened the strap on the weapon. Kira's gaze followed him, her eyes catching in the dim glow like polished stone. "You risk life," she said slowly, each word carefully shaped. Ethan grunted. "Guess I did." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Why?" Ethan's jaw tightened. It was the same question she'd asked before, but now her tone was sharper, almost demanding. "You were dying," he replied flatly. "I don't leave anyone to die if I can help it." Her eyes searched his face, as though looking for cracks in the answer. After a long pause, she looked away, staring at the small fire in the stove. Minutes passed before she spoke again, her voice low. "They hunt me because I know." Ethan's head tilted. "Know what?" Her hands gripped the edge of the couch cushion. "My people. Plan strike." "Here," she said, tapping the floor with her fingers. "Human city. Burn it." Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You're saying there's an attack coming?" She nodded slowly. "When?" He pressed, her brow furrowed, struggling with the words. "Soon. Very soon. Ships come in night." No warning, Ethan swore under his breath. It wasn't the first time he'd heard rumors of surprise raids, but hearing it from her own enemy defector was different. "You were part of that?" he asked sharply. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. "No, I refuse. I say no, kill civilians." She leaned forward, her voice trembling now. "Captains say I shame my blood. They try kill me. I run." Ranger's tail thumped once, as if sensing her rising distress. Ethan sat back, studying her. She had no reason to invent a story like this, if anything, telling him made her situation worse. Yet every word carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and barely escaped it. "You've got details?" he asked after a moment, her lips pressed together. Then she reached for a thin, metallic disc hanging from a cord around her neck. She held it out to him. Ethan hesitated before taking its surface was warm from her skin. "What is it?" "Data. Troop movement. Attack plan," she said slowly. "If you take human command, they stop it." Ethan turned the disc over in his hand. It was alien, tech sleek, seamless, with faint glowing lines pulsing like a heartbeat. If what she said was true, this thing could save thousands of lives, but it also painted a massive target on his back. If the patrols found her and the disc here, it would mean execution for both of them. "You realize?" he said slowly, keeping. "You here just went from dangerous to suicidal." Kira's eyes didn't flinch. "I know. But you not give me to them?" It wasn't a question, it was said with a quiet certainty that made him uncomfortable. "Why are you so sure about that?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. She looked at Ranger, then back at him. "Because?" "Your eyes, same as his. You protect." Ethan didn't reply right away. He wasn't used to being read like that, especially by someone who hours ago was a sworn enemy. But her words left a weight in the room. He finally muttered, "You give me too much credit," and set the disc down on the table. The silence stretched again, broken only by the fire's soft crackle. But underneath it all was a hum so faint Ethan almost thought he imagined it. Then Ranger's ears twitched, his head snapping up. Ethan froze, listening. The hum grew louder, this time accompanied by a rhythmic pulse. It wasn't the low sweep of a scanner, was deeper. Mechanical, airborne. Kira's eyes widened in recognition. "Dropship," she whispered, her voice tightening. They searched wide. Very wide. Ethan grabbed the lantern and doused it. Throwing the cabin into darkness, he crossed to the window, peering through the gap in the curtain. In the distance, barely above the tree line, a dark shape drifted, its underbelly lined with scanning lights. It was sweeping the forest like a predator looking for prey. "They won't stop tonight," Ethan muttered. Kira gripped the edge of the couch. "If they find me, they take disc. Attack happens." Ethan turned from the window, his decision already made. "We need to move," he said. "If that intel's real, we're not sitting here waiting for them to knock again." Kira's voice shook. "Where?" "We go. Somewhere they won't expect," Ethan replied, glancing at Ranger. "And somewhere they can't follow easily." Ranger gave a soft bark, as if ready for whatever came next. Kira looked at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded. She had placed her life in the hands of a human she'd met less than a day ago. But in that dark cabin, with the dropship's searchlights flashing in the distance, trust was no longer a choice. It was survival. Ethan began packing supplies. Water, the medkits, and the disc. Each item he shoved into the bag felt heavier with the weight of what it meant. Outside, the pulse of the dropship moved closer. The clock had started ticking. And if they didn't disappear before those lights touched the cabin, they wouldn't be leaving at all. The dropship's distant hum had turned into a low, constant vibration in the air. Its heavy engines throbbed like a slow heartbeat, each pulse reminding Ethan they were running out of time. The searchlights swept across the forest in wide arcs, cutting through the trees like pale knives if they lingered another minute. The beams would brush across the cabin, and then it would be over. Ethan moved fast, but without panic. He stuffed the last medkit into the worn canvas pack, grabbed a small stash of protein rations, and slid the alien data disk into a hidden pouch. Kira sat forward on the couch, her body tense, one hand pressed lightly against her side where the bandages wrapped her ribs. She looked at him without speaking, as if waiting for a command. "Can you walk?" Ethan asked, slinging the pack over his shoulder. She nodded quickly, though the brief flicker of pain in her eyes told him she wasn't nearly as ready as she wanted to be. "Ranger, heel," Ethan ordered. The dog came to his side instantly, eyes alert, tail stiff, his body already shifting into the familiar posture he'd used in Ethan's soldier days. Ethan opened the back door, and the cold night air poured in, sharp and metallic with the scent of the approaching dropship's exhaust. "Stay low," he murmured to Kira, "and keep close." The forest swallowed them quickly, the darkness thicker under the canopy. Ethan led the way along narrow game trails only locals knew. The frozen leaves crunched softly underfoot, and each sound felt too loud in the quiet night. Above, the faint beam of a searchlight swept past, briefly painting the treetops in pale blue before sliding away again. They moved for several minutes without a word. Ethan kept one ear tuned to the forest and the other to the distant mechanical hum overhead. But then a new sound, cut and faint, muffled, but distinct the crunch of boots moving in unison. Ground patrol? Ethan froze, holding one hand up. Kira stopped instantly. Ranger pressing close to her legs. Through the shadows, Ethan saw them. 3 alien soldiers moving in a staggered formation, scanning the ground with handheld devices. One of the scanners gave a short beep, and all 3 soldiers halted. Ethan's stomach drops. The soldiers began following them. Moving faster now, their low, clipped voices carrying faintly through the trees. "Change of plan," Ethan whispered. He gestured for Kira to follow as he veered off the trail, moving downhill toward a shallow ravine. The slope was slick with mud, and Kira stumbled once, catching herself on a branch. Ethan grabbed her arm and steadied her without breaking stride. Ranger ran ahead, then stopped, ears perked, nose twitching. They reached the bottom of the ravine, where a thin stream trickled through frozen rocks. Ethan motioned for Kira to step into the water. "Cold will hide our trail," he explained. She hesitated for only a moment before following him, the icy water soaking through her boots instantly. Ranger splashed in beside them without hesitation. They moved upstream for nearly 10 minutes. The water numbing their feet but masking their scent and footprints. Above them, the faint hum of the dropship grew louder again. The light swept through the ravine for a split second, illuminating their breath in the cold air before vanishing. Kira's eyes flickered upward, her breathing quick and shallow. "They almost see." She whispered. "They didn't." Ethan replied, "Keep moving." They eventually climbed out of the stream, moving toward an old, overgrown path that led deeper into the forest, but just as they crested the slope, Ranger stiffened, his tail rising and a low growl rumbling from his chest. Ethan froze. He knew that sound. It wasn't for the dropship, and it wasn't for the patrol. Something else was ahead. The brush shifted, and a wild wolf-like creature stepped into the path, its eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. Its fur was matted, and its fangs glistened as it bared them. Kira's hand moved instinctively toward a small blade at her belt, but Ethan motioned for her to stay back. Before he could act, Ranger lunged forward with a sharp bark, placing himself between them and the predator. The creature snarled and stepped closer, but Ranger held his ground. Barking furiously, Ethan seized the moment, grabbing Kira's arm and pulling her around the threat. They moved quickly down the path while Ranger danced backward, snapping at the predator to keep it focused on him. When they were far enough away, Ethan gave a sharp whistle. Ranger bolted toward them, the predator choosing not to give chase, disappearing back into the brush. By now, Ethan could hear the boots of the ground patrol again. They had picked up the trail despite the stream trick. "Run," he said simply. They broke into a jog, moving as quietly as speed allowed. Kira's breaths were sharp with effort, but she kept pace, clutching her side as she ran. After several minutes, the forest opened into a rocky clearing, and in the center sat a half-buried structuring old human bunker from the early days of the colony. Ethan hadn't been here in years, but it was the only place close enough to hide in before the patrol closed in. He pushed open the rusted metal hatch with a grunt, the hinges squealing softly. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rust, but it was shelter. They slipped inside, Ranger following last, and Ethan pulled the hatch closed, plunging them into near total darkness. Outside, the sound of boots drew closer, then stopped. Through the thick metal walls, Ethan could hear muffled alien voices. Kira leaned close, whispering, "They." Right outside, Ethan raised a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. Ranger lay flat at their feet, his breathing slow and steady, though his ears twitched at every sound. The patrol lingered for a long moment before the voices moved away. Ethan let out a slow breath in the darkness. "We're safe," he said quietly. Though in his gut he knew it was temporary, Kira met his gaze in the faint light from a crack in the hatch. "You save me again," she whispered. Ethan gave a small, tired smirk. Guess that makes us even almost. Outside, the dropship passed overhead again, its lights fading into the distance. But Ethan knew they hadn't escaped for good and only. Bought themselves a little more time, and time was running out. The bunker walls were cold. The air stale, but at least it was quiet. Ethan sat with his back against the metal, his rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the faint strip of moonlight. Bleeding through the hatch, Kira sat opposite him, her knees drawn close. The alien data disk clutched tightly in her hands. Ranger lay between them, head resting on his paws. But his ears still twitched at every distant sound. Hours passed in slow silence until the engines of the dropship faded completely. Only then did Ethan allow himself to relax his shoulders. "We move at dawn," he said quietly. Kira's tired eyes lifted. "To where?" "To the forward human command post about 20 clicks east," he replied. "If that disk is what you say it is. They'll want it." She hesitated, her hands tightening around the disk. "And me?" she asked, her voice low. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "If you're lucky, they'll put you somewhere safe," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure if he believed them. Human command didn't exactly have a reputation for mercy toward enemy defectors. The first light of dawn crept through the bunker's cracks, turning the metal walls a dull gold. Ethan rose, stretching his legs. "Time to move," he said. Pulling the hatch open, cold air rushed in, carrying with it the fresh scent of pine and damp soil. They stepped out into the forest. The ground, still wet with morning dew, the journey east was slow, every step measured. Ethan kept them off the main trails, using narrow deer paths and old logging tracks. Kira kept pace, despite the strain in her breathing, and Ranger ranged ahead, scouting. And circling back, the forest seemed calm now, almost peaceful. But Ethan knew it was an illusion. Enemy patrols could be anywhere. By midday, the land began to change. The trees grew sparser, the ground more open, and in the far distance, the faint glint of steel towers marked the outer perimeter of the human command base. Kira slowed, her gaze fixed on it. "This is where?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Where we hand over the intel. And maybe end this raid before it starts?" But as they drew closer, a troubling thought gnawed at him. Human command would take the disk. Yes, but what would they do with Kira? Best case, she'd be locked away for questioning for months. Worst case, they'd see her as an enemy spy and execute her before she could explain. Ranger trotted back to Ethan's side. Giving a soft whine, Ethan crouched, running a hand over the dog's head. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured, glancing at Kira. "We hand her over and hope for the best." Ranger didn't answer, of course, but the steady, trusting look in his eyes was enough to tilt Ethan's thoughts. They stopped at the edge of the final tree line, the base only a short walk away. From here, Ethan could see guards on patrol, the gleam of rifles under the noon sun. He turned to Kira. "Once we go in, there's no going back. You understand that?" She met his eyes, her expression calm despite the uncertainty. "I trust you," she said simply. Those words landed heavier than any order Ethan had ever received. Trust was a dangerous thing out here. It could get you killed faster than a bullet. And yet, she had given it freely. Ethan exhaled slowly, making his choice. Instead of walking straight toward the gates, he led her along a narrow ridge that curved around the base. There, hidden behind a cluster of old supply crates, was a small side entrance, one he'd used before during his soldier days. It wasn't part of the official patrol routes, and with a little luck, they could get inside without attracting attention. They slipped through the gap, weaving between storage buildings until they reached a small Cums hut. Inside, Ethan activated the secure terminal. Sliding the alien disk into the reader, the screen lit up instantly with streams of alien code. He transmitted the data directly to Command's central intelligence servers, marking it urgent priority within seconds. The comms officer's voice crackled over the line. "This is command confirmed source." Ethan hesitated, glancing at Kira, then said, "Source is friendly due. Not pursue," before cutting the link. Kira looked at him, puzzled. "You? Not give me to them." Ethan shook his head. "If I hand you over, they might destroy the intel just to get rid of you. Or use it to justify killing more of your people. This way, they get the warning and you disappear." Her lips parted, slightly, as if she couldn't quite process it. Disappear. "Where?" "Anywhere but here," Ethan said. "There's an old transport depot on the North Ridge. You can hide there until things cool down." She was silent for a long moment, then finally whispered, "You save me." More than life, Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. "Don't make me regret it." Ranger wagged his tail, stepping forward to nudge Kira's hand one last time. She knelt, pressing her forehead briefly to the dog's, her alien features softening. They parted at the edge of the depot road. Ethan watched as Kira slipped into the shadows, her figure vanishing among the derelict transport shells. Somewhere far behind them, alarms began to sound. Command must have read the data and realized how close disaster had been. Ethan turned away, Ranger at his side. The war would go on. But maybe, just maybe, one battle had been won without a single shot. And it had started with a dog's bark in the dead of night.